Welcome back to Management 720. Let's get started with Chapter 8. Just as a reminder of where we are in the big picture of things, Chapter 1 through 4 was short-term decision making, where we looked at fixed cost, variable cost, contribution margin, how to calculate things like break even or decide to outsource or sell as is. These middle four chapters, and we're on the last chapter of these middle four, 5 through 8, we looked at cost and pricing. So as I've mentioned before, our main focus is how to assign indirect cost, and chapters 5, 6, and 7 gave us multiple ways to do that: job order and process costing, activity-based costing, or doing production versus service departments. Chapter 8, we're actually looking at the bigger picture of cost and pricing decisions, how to calculate some means of calculating price, also just some of the other topics in this discussion. And this is where we'll finish up, and we'll test on chapters 5 through 8 next. In general, this chapter has a couple of small calculation type questions, not too many. I would say there is probably a few more than the last chapter, but they're not very difficult. Maybe one or two are a little more complicated. Most of this is going to be sort of knowledge base. And so most of these learning objectives are going to be covering various aspects of pricing and costing. Our first one is to look at the value chain. Also, we've recently called this the supply chain, but I guess the supply chain maybe is just focused just on production, whereas value chain looks at all the activities from raw material procurement to customer service, aftermarket customer service. And one of the things about the value chain is that not only does it focus on what you do internally, but it also focuses on your connections with your vendors, both internal and external links. When you look at the entire value chain, you start to recognize what are your core competencies versus what are not your core competencies, and you decide to perhaps outsource some of those things. So independent of a costing decision, you may outsource something. For example, Nike's core competency is not manufacturing in Asia. Its core competency is marketing and sort of demand creation through its products. And so it outsources. It still has a very tight relationship with its vendors, but it understands its value is doing marketing. The value of its partners are in production. So what you want to do is maximize the value across the value chain while minimizing cost. And while that seems logical, businesses are actually set up more to be focused on, we say, two things. Either they're siloed, meaning that people operate sort of independently, or divisions or departments operate independent of each other, or we work on sort of a node basis, meaning we might maximize a node, but maximizing each node may not maximize the entire supply chain or the entire value chain. What's a good example? Well, from the shipping manager based in Asia, let's say we're talking about Nike boxes or Nike shoe boxes, or Nike shoes in their shoe boxes. The manager in Asia may say, if I have a 40-foot or a 20-foot container, labor is pretty cheap here. I can get more boxes in a container if I just individually stack them, what we call floor stacking. That way I can maximize the amount of product we put in the container, and therefore I can minimize the per cost. If I divide up the container cost amongst all the shoes that were shipped in that container, I can minimize the per shoe cost of the container shipping. However, in the U.S., longshoremen and people working on the dock get paid quite a bit, and so they may open up a container, and because of union rules and overtime, they may see a floor stack container and say, oh my goodness, I'm going to put my kid through college on the overtime I'm going to get unpacking this floor stack container. And the other thing is, perhaps all those floor stacked boxes, maybe the boxes weren't designed to support 20 or 30 in a stack, and that's why they shrink wrap them on pallets. Now, shrink wrapping on pallets may protect the shoe boxes more, but there's obviously is going to be some dead space. So while you may tell your manager in Asia, shrink wrap and palletize those boxes, they may think, oh, your minimum, I'm not getting maximum value, but the overall value between those two, between the shipping and the destination, the origin and the destination, those, if I looked at those costs in tandem, the cost of palletizing rather than floor stacking would be more cost effective to palletize, even though I'm wasting some space, because I save on the labor cost and I save on damage cost at the destination. And you'd say, again, that seems logical, but there are a lot of instances where one department's trying to maximize their thing, which is at odds or adds cost to some other department's activities, and they will fight to the death trying to, because they're, those managers are getting paid on how well they utilize their resources, and to actively tell them, well, you've got to have a suboptimal solution for your department so that another department can get more benefit. Well, I can give you plenty of examples of where these things come to head. Anyway, if we look at the Exhibit 8.2 there, here's a generic process of internal value chain. Just realize processes are kind of a collection of activities. So if I looked at that inbound logistics activity, that could be receiving at the warehouse. You're going to inspect the packaging. You're going to have to break it down. If it's on a shrink wrap pallet, you're going to have to unwrap it and divide it up. You're going to put it away in the correct places in your warehouse, and then you're going to update inventory to show that that product's available. So those are a whole bunch of individual activities that are sort of related and all go together in the same inbound logistics process. And all of these different processes have a similar series of activities that go along with it. The second learning objective, cost-based pricing, is where we're going to probably do the majority of our calculation work, or something similar to this. Why do we use cost-based pricing? Cost data. Well, we've just spent 3 chapters figuring out ways to collect cost data. A lot of businesses are run on how well they collect their cost data. It's also very defensible if you say, well, these are my costs, I need to charge a price that's above those. It's just common sense and therefore defensible. And in the long run, revenues must exceed costs. I mean, that's just the normal business sense. So when we mark something up, we have to choose a cost base. And this is sort of a different way of looking at it than I've looked at it before. And I think what they're trying to get at here is you have a number of different types of collections of costs. You have manufacturing, you have administrative, fixed, and variable. One of these 4 is going to be predominant, meaning it's going to be the driver of the majority of your costs, or it's going to be the one that's most variable, or it's going to be the one you're examining the most. And so a lot of times with this markup, what they're saying is choose the one that for your business is the one you're really focusing on, and then the markup must cover that cost base plus those not included in the cost base. And maybe those are more standardized or don't need as much attention. And our equation is going to be cost not included in the base plus desired profit over the cost included in the base. We'll revisit this equation, but just realize we're going to pick a base and we're going to have a profit, and we're going to use those to figure things out. So cost-based pricing, there are some drawbacks. It requires accuracy, and that's why we spent the last 3 chapters defining multiple ways in which we can figure out what's the most accurate way to allocate all these costs. So if you're not good at allocating costs, then your cost-based pricing is not going to be very accurate. If you have, in this particular chapter, they call it unassigned costs, which in previous chapters they call indirect costs. If you have a higher proportion of these indirect costs, then perhaps your pricing model is going to struggle a little bit and you'll have mispricing, either high or low. The other idea about cost-based pricing, in other words, taking the cost and then marking it up, is that you are assuming that whatever the markup is, you take your cost plus whatever percent or amount of profit you want to add, that the market will bear that cost. Now, in some situations, that's true. Other cases, it's going to be more competitive. I would say the 2 general areas are you have a little more freedom with costs if you have a unique or very in-demand product like an iPhone. the iPhone people, while they're focused on cost, they're more focused on, well, whatever it costs, I'm going to charge a certain amount of, I'm going to put in all the features I want, whatever that costs, and then I'm going to mark it up, and the market's just going to have to bear that. Or you could have a very competitive product, a lot of things on the grocery store shelves, the difference between this canned beans and those canned beans. You can't just charge whatever you want. You've got to charge, within a few cents of what the competitors are charging. So what you start off, well, I can only charge this, and then you work back from there. How much profit do I need to make? And therefore, how much do I have to allocate towards cost? So that's one of the drawbacks of cost-based pricing, is that if you're marking up, you're assuming that you've done the research and the market will bear that price. And the whole process of understanding and collecting data does add time, and therefore could add, time to bring new products to the market. We're going to look at something next to say, well, if this is a new product, what do you do? But at least for cost-based pricing, these are existing products, well-known, the market, and what the market will bear. And as I was just mentioning, if you have a new product with no existing supplier demand, you've got to come up with some idea of what your price is going to be. And so that's something we would call target costing. Well, your starting point is to determine what you think. You've got a certain set of features for your product that you think the customer wants. What do you think the customer will pay for that? And work backwards. Now, a lot of times companies get so enamored of building a product or adding features that they don't realize what the costs are going to be until way down the line, and they still have to launch the product. Target costing sort of encourages you to focus on what can your production do currently rather than just adding new technology. And my example is the recent Apple Vision Pro that came out just, a couple months ago, selling for $3,500. That's the base model, and it goes up there to $3,900. Who is buying that, especially when there were VR headsets for much less than that? I mean, albeit still expensive. Well, Apple has already seen very underwhelming sales from that. They just price themselves way out of the market. Primarily, I think, because there's no great demand. There's no, every new technology has to have what they call a killer application, right? If you don't have a killer application, something that just drives people's need for it, then there's, a lot of times it doesn't sell. So since there's no killer 3D application, they've just really in my opinion, shot themselves in the foot. And they've already started talking about the next version is going to do without the headphones, maybe use some cheaper materials, but keep the critical technology in the viewing lenses. And so here's another situation of they didn't do their target costing correctly. It was a new product for them, but there was existing supply and demand knowledge in the other VR headsets. And they just designed something very technologically advanced, but that no one wanted or needed. So their next version, the rumor is it's going to be drastically cut to around $2,000. Even then, I think that's still higher than everyone else's. So target costing is focused on cost, means focusing on what your existing production processes can do rather than chasing potential customer desires, which I think the Apple Vision Pro, here's a very mature company that is a tech company that's been around forever. And even they get things completely wrong here and there. So just FYI, there's always need for good managerial accounting. Target costing is also good for products with short life cycles. And that's just because of the whole up and down of the cycle. You can get some information back. It's not for necessarily long-term products where you would have to do a little bit more calculating and figuring. But what is a life cycle? Well, you have startup where the sales are low, but the prices are high. That's where these early adopters maybe pay a lot more for a product just to have it before anyone else. And we've all seen people like that. Growth, and maybe perhaps some of you are. Growth where the demand has now started to kick in. There's no reason to reduce the price, but sales increase and they're starting to become profitable. Maturity, the sales plateau. They can have sales here and there, but still there's pretty good demand. And so any price reductions are relatively minor, and they're perhaps just based upon volume production capacity. Then when a product starts to decline, the sales drop, significant price reductions, the company is trying to clear inventories for the next model or the next model year, like with the next year of the iPhones. What goes into a life cycle as far as costs? Well, that's from the conception of the product all the way through the final stages of support. So design, pre-production, production, customer support, in all the way through the decline and the close of the product. And you've seen this sometimes with like Windows products. You'll hear, we're no longer supporting Windows 10, or we're no longer supporting Windows 8, or whatever. Even after the new product has come out, they will support the old product because a lot of people have it installed. But at some point, they're going to sunset their support and say, okay, after a certain date, this is the last update we're doing to such and such software. And after that, it is what it is. These final two learning objectives are quite short, actually. And as you can see, I can fit them on one page. Continuous improvement costing. The book says developed in Japan. The truth is not developed in Japan, although they did improve upon it. These concepts originated in a lot of engineering, improvements in the U.S. We didn't do anything with them, and the Japanese really did take to heart all of this continuous improvement and have a whole system. We mentioned a little bit about it in the last chapter, the Toyota production system. But one of what they call continuous improvement is called Kaizen. And it's just taking what you have and incrementally improving it, reducing waste, finding better ways to do things over time, which is the natural process. Whenever you start doing something, you always find something you didn't think of, which is a better way to do it. So if target costing from the last learning objective is the starting point, in other words, we have a new product, we come up with a price, and then from there we continuously improve, develop costing from there. And so Kaizen is what happens after we do the initial target costing. So what can we do? How do we can improve costs? Well, it could be improved internal processes, whether these are manufacturing or ordering or scheduling machines. There just could be something that we know, put these two machines closer together, something like that. Better material supply. Perhaps we find a better vendor, or the vendor we're working with gets better at providing that material. We have strengthened ties with vendors so that we can have shorter order cycles. We can have them do just in time, where they're delivering it right to the factory floor. And of course, there's always going to be incremental, and I should say not marginal, but incremental redesign of product and production. Incremental, in other words, we might find a way to marginally change how we make the product. It still does everything we need, but that change in the actual product design might have a lot of cost savings in production. And we actually see that quite a bit. That's like a very common thing. Change the product slightly, because that small change may not change the actual product use or ability, but it changes how we produce it significantly. For benchmarking, this is a way for us to just measure ourselves either against ourselves or versus others, and to make sure we have some way of, in other words, if we're going to have continuous improvement, we should be shooting towards some goal. And benchmarking is the way that we kind of systematically create these goals. Now, a benchmark can be both financial or non-financial, and here's a couple of examples, obviously cost and price, but a non-financial benchmark could be customer satisfaction, because it costs a lot of money to to find customers. So if you can retain the customers you have, those are cost savings in the overall value chain. Cycle times, return on assets, both again, non-financial and financial. What could you be comparing? You could be comparing yourself year to year over time. Am I improving? You can be comparing yourselves to your peer group, to the best in class, or even best in other industries. Now, sometimes when you're comparing yourself to best in other industries, they're doing something different. And so you may not take the exact numbers they use for benchmark, but you may see, how did they improve? Can I use something analogous in my industry, even if it doesn't transfer completely? And that's what happens when you get towards the top. You've got to look farther afield for ways to improve yourself. Look to other industries that are very advanced and see what they're doing. Okay, now let's move on to homework. So the homework may look like it's a bunch of questions, but notice here we've got 3 on markup, 2 on target costing, 2 on continuous improvement, and then 2 on product pricing. 1 is single and 1 is 2 product pricing. And so there's probably 3 questions are a little bit more involved, but the majority of these are pretty quick and simple, as we'll see here in just a second. Okay, our first one here is, let me bring it up. First one here is question number 7. It is one of the markup questions. Okay, so I'm just going to label this here. Markup questions. And there's 3 versions of this. And so here we've got number 7. Also, I'll just... maybe none of you noticed, or maybe you did notice, but in the last video, I was wearing some clothes that I had just was working out in the yard, and so I didn't realize how dirty the cuff of the little jacket that I was wearing. So I decided to wear something clean today. Anyway, if you had noticed that, I'm sorry. If you hadn't noticed that, you don't have to go back and look. Okay, so here. Remember, what we're trying to do is, I'll put the, we're trying to, what is the markup on variable manufacturing costs? So when we talk about markup, we talk about the fact that it is the non-base plus profit over the base, right? That's what we want to do. So here for number 7, 2 things we need to notice is that it says variable manufacturing costs. So of these 4 squares, it's talking about just this number as being the base, right? So if we put this in the base, and then we put the non-base, which is going to be all the other costs, so 600, 700, 850. And remember, we have to add the profit. But here it says break even. So break even with profit is going to be break even. There is no profit. It's 0. So what do we have? We have 850 over 200. That's going to come out to 4.25 or 425%. When we go to the next one here, number 8, again, we want to look at, is there profit, is there no profit, and then what is the base? The markup on selling and administrative costs. So it's not talking about one box, it's talking about both these boxes, right? It's talking about the total selling. So the point is, it can be either vertical, it can be horizontal, or it can be one box. So here we're talking about the base being 287,500. And we're talking about the non-base being 870,000. And there is no profit because it is break even. So 870 divided by 287,500 is going to be 3 rounded up to, rounded up two decimal places is 3.03 or 303%. The next one, number 9. So if you notice, all 3 of these are markup. It's just variations on a theme. Number 9 is going to be, what is the markup on fixed costs? So it's going to be this one, right? 52,500 is the base. What is not in the base is going to be 130,000. But notice, for the first time, we do have a required profit. So we're going to have to add 60K for profit. So this is going to be 190, right? 190 over 52,500. And that's going to come out to 3.62 or 362%. Okay, so those 3 were the markup. So let's draw a line under that. The next 2 are going to be on target costing. And let's take a look at number 10. Cindy is considering the production of a new line of dresses based on preliminary research. Number 10. Each dress should be priced at $160. Furthermore, management believes that the profit margin should be 25% of sales revenue. So a very straightforward question, but let's introduce some of the issues. So it says the question is, what is the target cost? But they give us the percentage as the profit. So here we could say $160 is the selling price, right? And you could say times 25% to figure out what the profit is, because that is the number they gave us, and that would be $40. And so you would take 160 minus 40 would equal 120 is the cost. Or you can recognize if that's the profit, you could just go directly say times 75% is the cost, right? And that would be also 120. So whichever way you feel is comfortable, but sometimes it's easier to see they gave us the percentage for profit, the other percentage is for cost, and that's what they're asking us for. Because sometimes when you start entering things into the calculator, you end up forgetting or you enter the wrong number. So the fewer steps that you can do, you can eliminate, usually the more errors you can reduce as well. Let's go on to number 11. So if this was an easier target costing question, well, let's just make sure we're right. If this was an easier target costing question, this one's going to be a little bit more difficult, but not so much so that we can't do it. So we've got a bunch of things. Oregon, please don't say Oregon. My mother's from Oregon. It has not gone anywhere. Oregon has not gone anywhere. It's Oregon. Okay. I'll get off my soapbox. Oregon Equipment Company wants to develop a new log splitting machine because we're all lumberjacks in Oregon for rural homeowners. Market research has determined that the company could sell, okay, I'm going to get back on my soapbox for just a second. Pay attention to movies or TV shows whenever they want to, if someone moved away or they couldn't find someone for a while or, someone disappeared, off the face of the earth. Almost invariably, they say, where have you been? We haven't been able to find you. Oh, I moved to Oregon. I don't know what it is but in Hollywood, moved to Oregon is shorthand for disappeared off the face of the earth. Now, granted, Oregon's not the edge of the world, but maybe we can see it from there. Okay, back to the question. Has determined we can sell 6,000 log splitting machines per year at a retail price $700 each. An independent catalog company will handle sales for annual fee of $2,000 plus $50 per unit sold. Cost of raw materials produce the log splitting machine amounts to $80 per unit. If the company desires return equal to 10% of the final selling price, desires a profit return equal to 10% of what is the target conversion minus? Basically what they're saying is, okay, here's the selling price, 700. And if we take out all these costs that they just told us about, what is left over? What is the target unit cost once we have taken out all the, in other words, what do we have left over to actually build the product? So first of all, we're going to have to take out, it says, I'm going to work backwards. So I'm going to start from, where they ask the question, I'm going to work backwards. So they said 10% of the final selling price. So that's for the profit, right? 10% times 700. Well, that's going to be 70. Then they say, I don't want to ask Copilot anything. They say $80. That's the type of variable cost. They say minus 50. That's another variable cost. Then they've got this fixed cost. It's 2,000 per 6,000 log machines. So they've got a fixed cost, which we need to calculate. And don't do this incorrectly. Don't do 6,000 minus over 2,000, right? You want to do the dollars per unit, right? So the dollars is the 2,000 and the units are 6,000. And that comes out to odd number of 0.33. And so, kind of running out of space here. What am I going to do? 700 minus 70, which is the profit, minus this variable cost, 80, minus this variable cost, minus the fixed cost spread over all of the units. In other words, a per unit fixed cost. And that's going to come out to $499.67. $499.67. Okay. So those are the two target costing. Let's get a new sheet of paper here. The next two are going to be continuous improvement questions. So there's a lot of numbers on this page. So let me just write up here. This is continuous improvement. Which number was it? 12. So there are a bunch of different numbers here, but just focus on what they're asking for. Now, they use this for several different questions, so that's why there's so many numbers. But it just says, let's look right down here. Near site's continuous improvement target for lens set was in 2020. Now, what is their target? 5%, a 5% reduction. And we're just going to do the same sort of thing that we did before. Now, here it says the lens for 2019. So this is what you actually did in 2020. But if you had a 5% reduction, what should it have been? So if we say 2380 minus 5%, well, minus 5% of what? 2380 would equal something. But again, like we were talking last time, if this is the amount of reduction, but it's asking what is the actual target, that's the reduction. What's the target? The target is to be 95% of this, right? So you can just multiply by 95%. And that will get you the number you need. So multiplying by 95% equals 2261. And that is, that's what this ends up coming out to anyway. But just recognize the more steps that you can logically skip, the fewer potential errors that you have. Let's just see if that's right. And the second one, so that one was just called a continuous improvement. And this one they called a Kaizen based program, meaning it's still continuous improvement. We're still trying to reduce costs, but it recognizes that over time, the costs will increase even though we are trying to reduce them. So how they explain that here is they say, here are some, so this is a service business, it's consumer loans. It says, Rapid Loans incurred the following cost. For the next 2 years, it expects increase in consumer loans of 5%. Now, you notice they didn't tell us anything about sales, and we don't really need to know anything about the sales because these are just the costs. But if they basically say, if we increase consumer loans, our cost will increase alongside them just because we're doing more loans. So the idea is that we want to do more, but we want to start saving money. So we don't want the consumer loan costs to go up at the same rate as the consumer loan sales. So here we have to do this in kind of 2 stages. If a company has continuous improvement goal of 2% each year, what you want to say, well, what would the new cost goal have been? Or what would the new cost have been in the next year? So they started off at 12,800. And if they went up by 5%, well, you can multiply it by 1.05. 5% is just the increase. The 1 means the original amount plus the 5%. And that's going to equal 13,440. So with the 5% increase in loans, we'd have a 5% increase in costs. The new cost would be 13,440, but we don't want them to go up by that much. We want to have some sort of continuous improvement to where we reduce the costs on a per unit basis. So we would take that 13,440, of which it should be if we just kept costs linear, and multiply it by what? Well, you can multiply it by 2% and subtract that, or we want the goal to be 98% of that. In other words, 2% less, a 2% improvement goal. And that's going to be 1,171.2. Well, it doesn't look like they have decimals here, but that should be the right number. So 13,000. So you notice first calculate what the linear increase in cost would be. Then off of that number, how much less would it be if we actually had a 2% savings of those increase in costs? The point being is, do not take 5 minus 3% equals 2% and then multiply by 2%. You have to multiply, because that would be 2% of the 12,800. You want a 2% savings off the 13,440. So this is a don't do. Do it sequentially. Here we're now, so those are the 2 continuous improvement questions. Here we've got a single product pricing. Now these last 2 may be a little bit more involved, but not too much more. So here the first question is we've got an income statement, sales less variable costs as the contribution margin less fixed costs as net income. We expect an increase in variable manufacturing costs of $12 per unit and in fixed manufacturing costs of $39,000. So I guess 2 things I want to kind of point out here is that we're going to be jumping back and forth between per unit and totals, because sometimes it's more effective to work the problem in a per unit, especially when the required answer is in a per unit, or sometimes it's necessary to do it in totals. So here, let's take a look at the first question. And the second thing I want to mention is that A, B, and C are all dependent upon this increase. So there have been questions before to where one question has one set of changes, another part of the question has a different set of changes. All 3 of these, A, B, and C, are all dependent upon this set of increases. So just keep that in mind. So first one here says, if sales for year 2 remain at 13,000 units, which is what they are here, what price should Grafton charge to obtain the same profit? So we want the same profit, and we want this, it's going to be the same units and the same profit. But if we have these increases, what do we need to do? Well, We could go through and multiply everything out, but this is a relatively straightforward question. First thing we want to know is, what is the sales per unit? And so we would take 2925000 divided by 13,000. Our per unit, so this is A, our per unit sales price is 225. Well, if we increase the variable cost and we increase the fixed cost, if we want to keep the same net income, the same profit, we need to increase the sales price. We need to increase this by whatever the increase in costs are, right? In other words, if the costs go up by $12 and we want to keep the same profit, we need to raise our price by $12, if that makes sense. So the first one here is given us in a per unit. So if we want to keep the same profit and costs are going up, we need to raise the sales price by the same amount to cover those costs. The other one is, so this is the variable cost. The fixed cost, we need to figure out a per unit increase, which is going to be 39,000 divided by the amount of units, 13,000. And as you can probably see, 39 divided by 13 is going to be an extra $3. So to cover the variable cost, we have to increase the price by $12. To cover the increase in fixed costs, we have to raise the price by another $3. So this is going to be a total of an increase of 240. Not an increase of 15 to a price of 240, I guess I should say. Because the question is, what price should we charge, not how much more should we charge. So this will be 240. Number B. Now B, I'm going to try and maybe do it side by side. I think I've got enough space here on the page to do it, to do B and C. And here's where we're going to kind of jump back and forth between unit and variable cost. Now we have sales here, and we just determined sales up here was 225, but they give us a new set of information here. They believe that sales can be increased to 16,000 units if the selling price is 200. So sales is going to be 16,000 times 200. Now you may think I'm going to extend this and figure out what the total is, but I'm going to show you that it's actually a little bit more effective for me not to do that. Next thing is minus cost of goods sold. And the cost of goods sold if we take the existing amount, 780,000 divided by 13,000 was 60, right? So it was 60, but it's now, remember we have to include these. So it was 60 and now it's going to be 72. So how did I get that 60? I took 780,000 divided by 13,000 units. That's the cost of goods per unit before we change things. And so now the new price is going to be 16,000 times 72. And then if I take out the sales and administrative, you notice we didn't do anything to this and we didn't change it. So if I just take 208 divided by 13,000, what was it before? $16 per unit. It's still going to be $16 per unit. It's just that we're going to be at 16,000. And therefore the contribution margin is going to be, well, do I need to multiply this out, multiply this out, multiply this out, and then find out? Or could I just figure out 200 minus 72 minus 16 times 16,000 is actually my contribution margin. So this is going to be 200 minus 88. So that's going to be 200, 16,000 minus times 112. And if I do that, 16,000 times 112 is going to be 1792, blah, blah, blah. Now it says Now we have to take out minus the fixed costs. Well, the fixed costs were 1095, but they increased by 39,000. So we have 1095 million plus 39,000 is going to equal 1134. Right, this is contribution margin minus the fixed cost will equal our new net income. And that's going to be $658,000. So this number would be 658. So that's the answer to that. Now for C, which I'm going to place right next to it. After considering the expected increases in costs, what sales volume is necessary to earn a pre-tax profit of 254? And that's another good reason why I did this. In other words, I want to figure out, instead of 16,000 at these costs, selling 16,000 at this cost will get me 658. But what they're saying is, well, how many do I need to sell? What's this number? Not 16,000. What is this number if I just want to make a profit of 254,800? Right? So think about this. The contribution margin minus the fixed cost equals net income. Well, this is going to stay the same. So net income, what minus 1134 equals blank minus this equals 254. So this plus this is going to equal my contribution margin. And so if I put in 254,800 plus the fixed costs. So I need to have a contribution margin of 1,388,800. This is the contribution margin necessary to subtract out fixed costs to get to their target profit. Now, how is this number created? This number is created by saying 112 times some volume. So 112 per unit times some volume will equal contribution margin. So X times 112, or I guess I should say 112X. So 112 is the dollar amount, X is the volume, equals 1,388,800. So all I need to do here, rather than go through all of this extensive stuff, which might get you confused, or you might end up writing the wrong number down, is divide by 112, and that should give me a volume of sales volume of 12,400. So these are the answers: 12,400, 658,000, and 240. 240, 658,000, 12,400. So that one's a little more involved, but actually it's a pretty useful exercise. I like this one. The last one is a two-product question, and there's actually a lot of work that can be done in this. And higher accounting majors will do a lot of work on this, but for you, I just want to do kind of a basic one. So here, we've got two products. Find out where I am. There we go. So number 15. We have CDs and DVDs, both on the same assembly line, packaged 10 discs per pack. Well, if you notice, the rest of the information is based on packs, so we don't need to know 10 discs. Predicted sales are 400,000 packs and 500,000 packs of DVDs. Predicted costs are this amount. Each product uses 50% of materials based on the manufacturing time. 40% of the other costs are assigned to CDs. See, I don't know why they use other and just indirect, which is what they've been using for the other chapters. The management of quality data desires an annual profit of $100,000. Okay, what price should quality data charge? Well, let's see. What price should quality data charge for each disc pack if management believes the DVDs sell for 20% more than CDs? So the way to do a two-product, problem is to define one of the products in terms of the original, or one, rather than have two different products, have, one product defined in terms of the other product. And I'll show you what I kind of mean here. So rather than saying try and solve for CDs and DVDs, what I'm going to say is I'm going to solve for CD, which is 1, and DVDs, which is 1.2 times the CD. So it'll be CD plus 1.2 times the CD. And we can solve from there. Now, what is it asking? What price should we charge? Well, the price we should charge is based upon volume, which we've been given as 400 and 500,000, and it's going to be the total costs plus the annual profit. Well, when we look at the total costs, we can see the costs are, if I just look here and I say, if I add these four together, 800 plus 500 plus 200 plus 250. These are going to come to, well, that's a million, 1.75. So 1.75 million are the costs, and it says it wants 100,000 in profit. So the total amount is going to be 185. This is the amount of money we need to bring in to cover costs and profit, right? This is the amount of money we need to bring in to cover costs and profit. Well, that means how much do we need to charge? Well, if a CD, we need to sell 400,000 CDs. So I'm going to say CDs times 400,000 plus, now rather than say DVDs, because that would be a two variable equation, we now know that DVDs are worth 1.2 of a CD, right? So I would say 1.2 CD times 500,000 should have moved that over a little bit. So what do we end up getting? We end up getting 500,000 times 1.2 is 600,000. So let me write it out a little better. 400,000 times the price of a CD plus 500 times 1.2, or 600,000 times the price of a CD, right? So that would be 1 million. So 1 million CD. So what would we get? We would say CD equals 1850 divided by 1 million. So CD equals $1.85. And a DVD, which is 1.2 times a CD, is going to be 1.85 times 1.2, $2.22. Okay, so that's going to be our numbers there for A. Now it's asking us, what is the total profit per product using the selling prices? So if we're using these two, well, we can kind of figure these out side by side. CDs and DVDs. What is the sales amount? The sales amount is going to be $1.85 times 400,000 of these, and that's going to be $740,000. For DVDs, it's going to be 2.22 times 500K. equal $1.11 million. Okay, now if we take out variable costs, so let's take, let's see. I think they do it materials and other. So, well, yeah, let's material costs. So based on manufacturing time, 40% of, or I'm sorry, each product uses 50% of the material costs. Well, the material costs are these two together, 700,000. So each of them use 350,000. And then it says based manufacturing time, 40% of other are assigned to CDs and 60% are assigned to DVDs. So this is 1.05 million. So 0.4. So minus the other, this is going to be 40% times 1050. And this is going to be 60% times 10550. And I got that from just in my head, adding 800 and 250. So 0.4 times 1050, 123, is going to be minus 420,000. And 60% is going to be $630,000. So if I take this column, 740 minus 350 minus 420 is going to be minus 30,000. In accounting, we write it obviously minus 30,000, but here I think it says use negative signs. Here we've got 110.11 million minus 350 minus 630 equals 130,000 profit. So this one's at a loss and this one's at a profit. So these are the answers. Let's see what we get. And those are the answers. So yeah, as long as you just follow the process. I mean, I know you have different numbers in your homework questions, but as long as you follow the process, you should be just fine. Okay, that should do us for Chapter 8. If you have any questions, let me know. I will be putting out the quiz for Exam 2 here shortly, next day or two. That should give you, a week to work on it. And I'll be putting out the exam prep document here also before the weekend's out. All right, have a good one and talk to you soon.